Story 1. I do not really call them anything. I just say hello and leave. Story 2. To their faces, or I call them by their first names, which is what they introduced themselves as and invited me to call them. Story 3. Joyce and Harry are the best. They are much better than my parents ever were and really wonderful grandparents too. Story 4. I do not. I avoid using their names at all costs. It has been 10 years and I have never used their names. Story 5. I used to call them mom and dad, but I don't call them anymore because they died. Story 6. Just by their names, and if someone does not know them, I just say my partner's parents. Story 7. I called them mother and father, which was easy because they were better parents to adult me than my own. I love them both dearly and miss them since they passed a few years ago. Story 8. Auntie and uncle. But I am brown. We call everyone who is older auntie and uncle. Story 9. Their first names are collectively my in-laws. They are good people. Not many people can say they genuinely like their mother-in-law and father-in-law. Story 10. I call them what my children call them now. Before, I awkwardly avoided using any names. Story 11. Funny. My sister calls her in-laws mom and dad to their faces, but she hates them, so it makes me cringe. I think it would be less hypocritical if she called them by their first names. Story 12. From my own experience in the United Kingdom, you call your partner's parents by their first names. Your partner usually calls them mum and dad. There's a chance that your partner's parents will insist you be more formal and use Mr. and Mrs. last name. Titles such as Sir, Lord, Lady, and so on may also be required. If you feel really comfortable with your partner's parents, the option to call them mum and dad is there, if they are okay with that. Another alternative is to call them whatever the grandchildren call them, especially if the children are yours. My dad is called Gumpy and my mom, she is American and my stepmother. So mom differentiates her from my mum, is called Grandy. Using these terms helps to differentiate between my dad and my kid's dad and the three grandmothers, although Grandy is the only one they have contact with. Story 13. That person and Mr. Smith. Now to their face, just Jim and Susan. Story 14. To their faces, I use their first names. When they are not around, I think of the people I wish had raised me. Story 15. Mama and Papa. I personally do not call them by their first names because that seems rude. They encourage me to call them Mama and Papa. Story 16. Mom and Dad. I am estranged from my family, so it is not confusing. They love me like I am their child. It just feels right. Story 17. His mom is mom to me. I call his stepfather by his first name. Story 18. I usually try to avoid using their names unless absolutely necessary. Even after a relationship and with my friends, calling them by their actual name feels strange to me. I do not know why. Story 19. I used to say mom and dad. They have passed on now. I call my current in-laws Mama Peggy and Dad. In my opinion, these are just words, and they have earned my respect. Story 20. 12 years later, married for 6 years. I still call them Mr. and Mrs. last name. Story 21. My dad calls my grandpa Sarge because he taught the Reserve Officers Training Corps when he was in high school, and he was in his class. Story 22. My girlfriend is the type to call my mom Mom, and even when we marry, it will be strange. Story 23. Same thing I call everyone. Hi. Now that they are grandmother and grandfather, I can refer to them like that. Story 24. Current significant other's parents are not living, but I called my ex's parents by their first names. They were comfortable with that. I would have called them Mr. and Mrs. if they preferred, but not mom and dad. I already had a mom and dad. Story 25. First names. Grandparents are the grandparent name though. Story 26. Their first names are Tirwilligar and Esperanza, which are not their real names. Story 27. My situation is unusual. I call her parents by their first names. But here's the issue. Both families are typical Midwest Catholic families for generations. My parents and her parents are John and Mary and John and Mary. My real name and my wife's name are the male and female versions of the same, also Holy, name. Many people have said, "This is my brother Daryl and my other brother Daryl," to us throughout her life. I would tell you how close our last names were too, but I do not want people I know to find me on social media. I will say there is a difference of 1 to 3 letters. Like one of us had a surname with a suffix added, similar to Charles and Charleston, or Williams and Williamson. Story 28. To their faces I avoid. In any other situation, I use their first names. Story 29. My mother-in-law is the last parent alive, so I started calling her mom after my mom passed earlier this year. I have been her daughter-in-law for over 25 years and had always called her by her first name. She was so thrilled that she got teary and beams every time I say, "This is my mom." I am lucky to have had great in-laws. Story 30. I'm pretty close with my in-laws. Depending on the situation, how I address them can vary. To my father-in-law, we have a custom where we greet each other with, "Hello, Mr. First name." When I speak to him directly, I always say sir. With my mother-in-law, it is mostly the equivalent of auntie in our language and culture. I also run their company, so professional emails are always addressed using their first names. Story 31. Mr. P and Mrs. P told me to call them whatever I am most comfortable with. This works for us. Story 32. When talking to my wife, your parents, dad, mom. When talking to other people, wife's name as parents, dad, mom. Story 33. I was introduced to them as Papa and Tootie, which is what the grandchildren call them. All the adults call them that. My husband calls them that. They call each other that. My brother-in-law's new wife calls them by their first names, which is funny because she was a family friend for about 20 years before they got married and used to call them Papa and Tootie too. My husband does not call my parents anything. Story 34. They say, "Call me," insert forename. I say, "Thank you, Mr. or Mrs." Then I continue with the latter. Story 35. Father. My husband is not communicating with his mother, so only with his father. Story 36. Mom and Dad. My own family is so awful that whoever I tell about them either does not believe me that it was that bad, or they hate them. They have adopted me in a way. I still struggle with the concept of family. Every time I do not automatically trust or shy away, they look a little hurt. But I am doing what I can. Story 37. My husband is Welsh and his parents insisted that I call them Mum and Dad. They were both lovely. Story 38. Mama partner's last name and Papa partner's last name. Story 39. Racist bigots disowned my husband when we adopted biracial siblings. The things they said broke my husband's heart. Story 40. While reading some of these answers, the idea popped into my head. In 60 to 70 years, if all this sex and gender discussion actually continues into the future, I would like to see the variety of randomness that would result from the same question being asked. Story 41. My mother-in-law asked me to call her by her name. We are Latin American, so I do not treat her with the formal usted. I call her by her name and use tu. In my country, this is called tutier. It usually applies when the relationship is closer in age or more open. My father-in-law hates his name, so I call him sugro. In Spanish, this means father-in-law, and I speak to him with more respect. I use usted when I talk to him. Story 42. My husband called my dad Ed for 4 years. My dad's name is Ron. Story 43. I call them by their names, but my mother-in-law sometimes gets mixed up and calls me her sister-in-law. Story 44. It was their first names, but since having my daughter, it is now nanny and granddad. I tend to call my stepdad granddad too. It is pretty much just my mom that I do not call grandparent. Story 45. Depends on how close you are with them. I just use please when talking to them. Story 46. I don't have a significant other, but my brothers-in-law call my parents by their names if they have to get their attention. Otherwise, they just stand really close to them and talk to them. My brother's girlfriend, on the other hand, has been calling our parents second mom, other mother, or just mom. She calls my dad other dad or old man. He's the youngest of both our parents and hers, and he complains that he's old. It's very entertaining. Story 47. I call them by their first names, but I am their only daughter-in-law who does not call them mom and dad. I do not think they care, but I believe the other siblings-in-law think it is weird or rude. Story 48. I call them mom and dad in Korean, so Amma and Appa. Story 49. I have a funny story. I am Asian, and it is common for everyone to call their parents auntie or uncle. When I first started my relationship with my boyfriend, I was confused about what to call his parents. The Asian part of me wanted to call them auntie and uncle, but the part of me who grew up in the United Kingdom knew that was unusual and that I should call them by their first names. I have been with my boyfriend, now husband, for 8.5 years, and I have still managed to avoid referring to his parents by any name. I have not called them by their first names, auntie or uncle, or even mom or dad. Story 50. My mom told my husband to call her mom, and my dad is dad. It is very cute to hear him refer to them as mom and dad. It sounds like a Star Wars character. Story 51. Mom and dad, when using our language, is cultural. It has nothing to do with how close we are. I am Black African. Story 52. My wife's father passed away a couple of years ago, but I call her Mother Ma. Story 53. I refer to my in-laws as mother and father. However, that did not happen until at least 3 years into dating before we actually got married. Story 54. I call my boyfriend's mother by her first name. I do not call my boyfriend's father anything because he left. Story 55. I usually do not have to call them anything. I just speak to them. When referring to them, I use their first names. Story 56. I have never had the chance to speak to them. They are Japanese. I am gay. My husband's father does not even know I exist, even though it has been over 15 years at this point. Story 57. 9 years of marriage and I don't call them anything. We don't have the type of relationship where I feel comfortable calling them mom and dad. They are not my mom and dad, and it would feel unnatural for me to say that. They, or at least my mother-in-law, would hate it if I used their first names. So yes. Story 58. Now that I realize it, I have never actually said her name in person. She will peek into the room if I am there while he is at work to see if I need anything, but other than that, we usually just have short conversations. Story 59. Nothing, because they both died before we started dating. Story 60. Not me, but my friend has a girlfriend named Mia, and he calls her mom Mama Mia. Story 61. I do not know what to call his mother, so I avoid sentences where a name is needed. Story 62. First meeting them, it was Mrs., last name. Then it quickly became Mrs., first name. Then just first name. Now we call them by the names our kids call them, for example, Mimi and Pops. Story 63. Robert and Karen would not recommend since those are not their names. Story 64. Mom is mother-in-law. She is literally like a mom to me, more so than my actual biological parent, so I affectionately call her my mom and she refers to me as her daughter. I am very happy to have her in my life. Name is her partner. Super chill and nice guy. No issues with him, but he is not my partner's dad and my relationship with him, as amazing as it is not dad status. Hey is my way of avoiding asking what my father-in-law wants to be called. He is a nice guy too, very kind and good with our daughter when we see him, but it is awkward. He is not nearly as talkative or goofy as mom, so it still feels like a just meeting the parents vibe every time despite knowing him for nearly a decade. He is not dad to me the way mom is to me, yet calling him by his name feels too informal and calling him Mr. Last Name feels too formal. So for now, and maybe the rest of his life, it will be hey. Story 65. I have never addressed them formally. I just say, oh hey man, or hey bud. It feels like I am in too deep, so using Mr. or Mrs. sounds too formal. I have been with my fiancée, soon-to-be wife, for almost 5 years. Story 66. Either first names or, if the little grandchildren are around, their grandparent names. I did not like mom and dad because I have a great relationship with my parents, and I was not going to use those names with anyone else. Story 67. My boyfriend gets mad because I always say mom and grandpa when referring to his family. I don't know why I do it. Story 68. They never told me what to call them. They started writing mom and dad on the tags on presents, and I swiftly put a stop to that. You are not my dad. Story 69. To their faces, nothing. I totally avoid it. But when talking about them to others, I refer to them as partner name S mum or partner name S dad. I don't use their names because it feels weird. They never really introduce themselves to me by name. It's too intimate. I can't use parental titles because that's also too intimate. My language doesn't have any convenient terms for this. I can't say Mr. X or Ms. X because it's too formal, and society has moved away from that kind of formality. Story 70. I have never addressed them as anything in almost 10 years. Story 71. Their first names. I feel super weird calling people Mr., Miss, or Mrs. in my 30s unless they are a client, and even then, it is odd. I am always very confused when people address me as Miss or Mrs., and I have to tell them to use my first name. Story 72. I call my mother-in-law Mom. It just came out one day and it hasn't stopped. She loves it. Her husband, my husband's stepdad, always goes by Rick, even with all the kids. I called him Dad once and he looked like his heart melted. So it's just been a thing. Story 73. Mom and Dad. They are 100% Calabrese from the old country. Story 74. I call her mother because she has been a better mom to me than my own. Story 75. Used to call them Mom and Dad until Mom spoke out of turn. Now I don't speak to them. Story 76. Their first names are not my parents, and while they are nice to me, I should not expect they will care for me in any real capacity compared to my parents. I am just happy to have good in-laws. Her family, even with a language barrier, goes above and beyond for me. Story 77. Narcissistic person and Alan. Not that I see them very often. Story 78. I call them my pension because they are wealthy, and their daughter is very difficult. Story 79. Dr. Mama insisted that I call her mother doctor, and her mother insisted that I call her mama and not by her name. I do not call her father anything because for the past 2 years, he has always been out of the house whenever I visit. Story 80. Just their first names. I experienced one where they wanted me to call them Mom and Dad already, and I was like, no, that's going way too fast in my head. Story 81. Mom or Dad, but pay attention to what your significant other calls their parents. Story 82. Was married for 7 years, divorced, and have been dating someone new for almost a year now. I have always called my in-laws and girlfriend's parents by their first names. Calling them Mom and Dad just felt really awkward. Story 83. Her name is Cheryl, pronounced like terrible. Story 84. I have never met them in person, but I will this year. I am not sure if they want me to address them by their first name. I have never met them and do not feel close to them. Story 85. Sagrinya, an affectionate term for mother-in-law in my language, and magnificent, as per a joke at the beginning of the relationship. Story 86. I'm sure they would love me to call them Mom and Dad, but I have parents whom I love, and my in-laws are unpleasant. For a while, I just avoided it by speaking generally, but when we had children, it gave me a convenient way out. Now they are Opa and Granny, and I am off the hook. Story 87. We've been together for 17 years, but we are not married. I get on well with his parents, so they usually call me their daughter-in-law when talking to other people about me. I call them outlaws mostly, occasionally in-laws. When addressing them, I call them by their given names. Story 88. They are named. And now often grandma or granddad because of our toddler. But it's like when I talk about them to her, not when I talk to them. Story 89. Difficult situation. Her father passed away before I met her, and her mother died of cancer a couple of years into the relationship. Story 90. Auntie and uncle, which is not considered good in our culture, but I have never been able to change it. Story 91. I call him Dr. House. His name is not Dr. House. He is not even a doctor. Story 92. We have been married for almost 30 years, and I still call them by their first names. They are my wife's mother and father, not mine. Story 93. auntie, I mean mom, uncle, I mean dad, in the next sentences after a long stare from my wife. Story 94, her father, whom I call Mr. Smith, not his real name, and her mother, whom I call mom, are referred to in a foreign language. Story 95, by their first names. Feels strange to call them mom or dad, as if I were dating my sister. Story 96, when I first meet them, I go by their first names. After a few times, it's mom and dad. Story 97, Mr. and Mrs., followed by their first names. I was raised in the South, so that's pretty much what I call anyone a few years older than me. Story 98, her mother is deceased. Her father is a pedophile and is currently relying on his extended family for support. We have no contact with him. So, nothing? Story 99, Mr. and Mrs. They are not warm and fuzzy people. I was raised in a pretty formal kind of family myself. Story 100, my son-in-law refers to my wife and me as the outlaws. We prefer it to in-laws. Story 101, we didn't marry before he died, so I call his mom my mother-in-law instead of mother-in-law. When I address her, I call her by her first name or ma, which is what he called her. Story 102, mom and dad. My mother is dead, and my father is dead to me. Story 103, I use first names when I am talking directly to people. If I am talking about them to someone else, I usually refer to them as in-laws. I have been dating the same woman since 2010, and I call her my partner because girlfriend does not seem to carry enough weight for me. Story 104, I don't. I speak directly to them without using any title or name, living in constant fear of the day when I am supposed to address them somehow. When discussing them with other people, they are significant others' parents. Story 105, they don't mind me using their first names, but I feel weird doing that, so I try to avoid saying them as much as possible. Story 106, mother-in-law and father-in-law to others and their names to their faces. Story 107, their first names if I am talking to them, my in-laws if I am talking about them. Story 108, I will translate the titles since our families are not native English speakers. Technically, we are supposed to call them auntie and uncle before we get married, and mom and dad after we get married. That is what most people do. Realistically, though, I do not call them anything and they have not pressed the issue. I am sure first names would be unacceptable, though. My husband calls my stepdad family name uncle mainly because my stepdad is a family friend of theirs and he was taught to call him that from the time he was a child. He does not call my mom anything because he also finds it awkward. In front of other people, he calls my mom my name S-mom and I call his parents his name S-parents, mom or dad. Story 109, use first names when speaking to them one-on-one. Use grandma or grandpa when the kids are involved. I do not see myself ever calling my mother-in-law mom and find the idea deeply offensive, but I could see calling my father-in-law dad possibly. Story 110, I call them the same names my children use. I used to call them by their first names. Story 111, ugh. She always made me call her Mississippi. It was a power play. Story 112, I have known my in-laws since I was 14, so I used to call them Mr. or Mrs. followed by their first name. Now, being in my 30s and married to their son for over a decade, it feels awkward. However, I also do not feel right calling them by just their first names. I am partially thrilled to have a baby, so I can use grandma and grandpa. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.